The rope burns on Genevieve Norton's wrists had stopped bleeding an hour ago, but the pain still screamed through her arms as the wagon jolted over another rut in the desert road. She lay on her side in the back of the covered wagon, her dark hair matted with dust and sweat, her green eyes fixed on the canvas above her that rippled in the scorching Arizona wind. 3 days ago she had been shopping for fabric in Winslow, and now she was bound like cattle, heading toward a fate she could only imagine in her worst nightmares. The two men driving the wagon had barely spoken to her since they grabbed her from the alley behind Morrison's general store. She had been 22 years old for exactly 1 week, had been living with her aunt in Winslow for 6 months, and had finally started to feel like she belonged somewhere after her parents died in a fire back in Missouri. Then these strangers with their cold eyes and rough hands had changed everything in an instant. "How much farther?" the younger one asked, his voice carrying back to where Genevieve lay. "Another day, maybe 2, the older man replied. "Boss said to take the long route, make sure nobody follows." Genevieve closed her eyes against the tears that threatened. She had screamed until her voice gave out that first day. She had pleaded and bargained and tried to reason. Now she simply existed in a fog of fear and exhaustion, the desert heat pressing down on her like a physical weight. The wagon creaked and swayed, the horses maintaining their steady pace across the barren landscape. Genevieve could see slivers of the world outside through gaps in the canvas, nothing but red rock and scattered brush as far as the eye could see. They had left any semblance of civilization behind yesterday, following what could barely be called a trail through the wilderness. She thought of her Aunt Margaret, who would be frantic by now. She thought of the small room above the boarding house where she had lived, the yellow curtains she had sewn herself, the books stacked beside her narrow bed. She thought of the life she had been building, one careful step at a time, and how it had all been ripped away in the span of minutes. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Genevieve heard something that made her heart leap. Hoofbeats. Fast ones. Someone was riding hard, closing the distance between them and the wagon. "We got company," the younger man said, his voice tight with tension. The older one cursed. "How many?" "Just one, looks like. One rider. Keep going. We can handle one rider." But there was something in the sound of those approaching hoofbeats that filled Genevieve with a desperate hope. She struggled to sit up, her bound hands making it nearly impossible to balance as the wagon continued to bounce along the rough ground. "Stop right there," a voice called out, deep and commanding, carrying across the desert air with absolute authority. The wagon slowed but did not stop. Genevieve heard the metallic click of a gun being cocked. "I said stop," the voice came again, closer now. "Stop those horses or I will stop them for you." This time the wagon lurched to a halt. Genevieve's heart hammered against her ribs as she heard the stranger's horse come alongside the wagon, heard the creak of leather as he dismounted. "This is none of your concern, friend," the older man said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "We are just traveling through." "With a woman tied up in the back," the stranger replied. "I do not think so." Through the gap in the canvas, Genevieve caught her first glimpse of him. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years spent under the harsh Arizona sun. He wore a dusty brown hat pulled low over his eyes, and even from her limited vantage point, she could see the easy confidence in the way he stood, feet planted wide, hand resting on the gun at his hip. "The woman is none of your business," the younger man said. "We have every right to transport her where we please." "Is that so?" The stranger's voice carried a dangerous edge now. "Then I suppose you will not mind if I ask her whether she wants to be transported." "Now listen here," the older man started, but he was cut off by the sound of canvas being roughly pulled aside. Sunlight flooded the back of the wagon, momentarily blinding Genevieve. She blinked against the glare and found herself staring up at the stranger. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and intense, and they widened slightly when they took in her bound wrists, her torn dress, the bruise blooming across her left cheekbone. "Madam," he said, and his voice had gentled considerably. "Are you here of your own free will?" "No," Genevieve managed, her voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. "Please, they took me from Winslow. They are taking me somewhere, I do not know where, I do not know why, please help me." The stranger's jaw tightened. In one smooth motion, he swung himself up into the wagon bed and pulled a knife from his belt. Genevieve flinched instinctively, but he simply reached for her bound wrists and began sawing through the rope. "Hey!" the younger man shouted. "You cannot do that." "I just did," the stranger replied calmly as the rope fell away. He slid the knife back into his belt and then gently took Genevieve's arm, helping her to sit up. "Can you stand?" "I think so," she said, though her legs trembled as he helped her to her feet. The wagon bed swayed beneath them, and she would have fallen if not for his steadying hand on her elbow. "This is kidnapping," the stranger said, his voice carrying to the two men at the front of the wagon. "You do understand that is a hanging offense in Arizona territory." "You do not know what you are getting into," the older man said. "The man who hired us has friends in high places. You would be wise to turn around and forget you ever saw us." "I would be wise to shoot you both right here and save the territory the cost of a trial," the stranger replied. "But I am feeling merciful today. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to turn this wagon around and head back to wherever you came from. The lady is coming with me, and if I ever see either of your faces again, I will not be feeling so generous." "You are making a big mistake," the younger man said, but there was fear in his voice now. "The only mistake being made here was when you decided to kidnap an innocent woman," the stranger said. He turned back to Genevieve. "Hold on to me." Before she could process what he meant, he had swept her up into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped in surprise, her hands instinctively gripping his shirt as he jumped down from the wagon with her. Her feet touched the ground and her legs immediately buckled. The stranger caught her again, his arm solid around her waist. "Easy now," he murmured. "When was the last time they let you eat or drink?" "Yesterday morning," Genevieve admitted. "Maybe time has been hard to track." His expression darkened, but he simply nodded and guided her toward his horse, a magnificent roan gelding that stood patiently waiting a few yards away. Behind them, the two men in the wagon sat frozen, clearly trying to decide if they had any play left to make. "If I were you," the stranger called back over his shoulder, "I would be making tracks right about now, before I change my mind about letting you live." The older man muttered something under his breath, but then she heard the snap of reins and the wagon began to move, turning in a wide arc back the way it had come. Genevieve watched it go, relief flooding through her so intensely that her knees went weak again. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. I do not know how to thank you enough." "No thanks necessary, madam," he said. He reached for his canteen and unscrewed the cap, handing it to her. "Drink slowly, not too much at once or you will make yourself sick." The water was warm and tasted slightly of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing Genevieve had ever experienced. She forced herself to take small sips, though every instinct screamed at her to gulp it down. When she handed the canteen back, the stranger studied her face with those intense gray eyes. "My name is Wesley Aldridge," he said. "I run cattle about 20 miles south of Winslow. I was heading back from Flagstaff when I spotted that wagon taking the old smuggler's route. Something about it did not sit right with me, so I decided to investigate." "Genevieve Norton," she replied. "I live in Winslow, or I did. I was shopping 3 days ago and these men grabbed me from an alley. They put a cloth over my face and when I woke up I was already in the wagon." Wesley's expression grew even grimmer. "Did they hurt you? Beyond the ropes and that bruise?" "The bruise came when I tried to fight them off," Genevieve said. "They hit me, tied me up, but they did not." She trailed off, her face flushing. "They did not touch me in other ways." "Small mercy," Wesley muttered. He glanced back in the direction the wagon had disappeared. "Did they say anything about who hired them? What they wanted with you?" Genevieve shook her head. "Just that their boss was expecting me, that they would get paid well for delivering me. That is all I could get from the little they said." Wesley was quiet for a long moment, and she could practically see him working through the information. Finally, he said, "Well, first things first. We need to get you back to Winslow, back to your family. Can you ride?" "I can try," Genevieve said, though the truth was she had not been on a horse in months and had never been particularly skilled at it even then. Wesley seemed to read the uncertainty in her voice. "We will ride double," he decided. "It is not ideal, but it is only about 30 miles. We can make it by tomorrow afternoon if we pace ourselves and stop to rest through the heat of the day." He swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then reached down for her. Genevieve took his hand and let him pull her up behind him. The world spun slightly as she settled onto the horse's back, her head swimming from dehydration and exhaustion and the sheer, overwhelming relief of being free. "Hold on tight," Wesley said. "And if you start to feel faint, you tell me right away. Understood?" "Understood," Genevieve replied. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid strength of him, the warmth radiating through his shirt. He smelled of horse and leather and desert sage, and for the first time in 3 days, she felt something like safety. Wesley nudged the horse into an easy walk, heading in the direction that would take them back toward Winslow. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange and deep crimson. Despite everything she had been through, Genevieve found herself struck by the beauty of it. "How did you know?" she asked after they had been riding for a while. "How did you know something was wrong with that wagon?" Wesley was quiet for a moment before answering. "I grew up out here," he said finally. "Been running these trails since I was old enough to sit a horse. You learn to read the signs, learn what belongs and what does not. 2 men with a covered wagon, taking the long route through the middle of nowhere, avoiding the main roads. That tells a story all by itself. Add in the fact that they were pushing their horses too hard for just a casual journey, and I figured something was off." "I am glad you trusted your instincts," Genevieve said softly. "So am I, madam." They rode in silence for a while longer, the rhythm of the horse's steady gait almost hypnotic. The sun slipped below the horizon and twilight spread across the desert, bringing with it a blessed relief from the oppressive heat. Stars began to appear overhead, more stars than Genevieve had ever seen in her life, scattered across the sky like diamonds on dark velvet. "We will stop here for the night," Wesley announced as they approached a small cluster of rocks that offered some shelter from the wind. "There is a spring not far from here and we can both use the rest." He dismounted and then helped Genevieve down. Her legs were stiff and sore and she stumbled as her feet hit the ground. Wesley caught her elbow, steadying her. "Easy," he said. "Your body has been through a lot. Give it time to recover." While Genevieve sat on a flat rock, Wesley unsaddled his horse and checked its hooves, speaking to the animal in low, soothing tones. Then he gathered some dried brush and built a small fire using matches from his saddlebag. The flames caught quickly in the dry tinder, casting dancing shadows across the rocks. "I do not have much in the way of food," Wesley admitted, rummaging through his saddlebag. "Some jerky, some hardtack, and a couple of apples I bought in Flagstaff, but you are welcome to all of it." "Anything would be wonderful," Genevieve said honestly. Her stomach had been gnawing at her insides for hours. He handed her an apple and some jerky, keeping only a small portion for himself. Genevieve tried to protest, but he waved her off. "I can go hungry easier than you can right now," he said simply. "Eat." She did, forcing herself to go slowly despite her hunger. The apple was crisp and sweet, the jerky tough but flavorful. Wesley sat across the fire from her, his hat pushed back on his head, watching the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight. "Tell me about your family," he said after a while. "Your aunt in Winslow, you said." Genevieve nodded. "Margaret Norton. She runs the boarding house on 2nd Street. She took me in after my parents died last year. A fire back in Missouri, they both." She swallowed hard. "They both died trying to save what they could from the house. I had nowhere else to go, and Aunt Margaret wrote and said I should come stay with her. So I used what little money my parents had left me to buy a train ticket west." "I am sorry about your parents," Wesley said quietly. "That is a hard thing to carry. Thank you." Genevieve looked down at her hands, at the angry red marks the ropes had left on her wrists. "Aunt Margaret has been wonderful. She gave me a room, helped me find work doing sewing and mending for people in town. I was finally starting to feel like I had a life again, like I could be happy. And then this happened." "It will not happen again," Wesley said, and there was steel in his voice. "Once we get you back to Winslow, we will report this to the sheriff. He can send word to the marshals, start an investigation into who hired those men and why they wanted you." "You think they will come back for me?" Genevieve asked, fear creeping into her voice. "I think anyone who would hire kidnappers does not give up easily," Wesley said honestly. "But I also think that once this becomes official law business, they will have a much harder time trying anything. And in the meantime, you will have people watching out for you. People like you." The words slipped out before Genevieve could stop them. Wesley met her gaze across the fire. Even in the flickering light, his eyes were striking. "Yes, madam," he said softly. "People like me." Something passed between them in that moment, something Genevieve could not quite name. A connection, perhaps. An understanding. Despite the circumstances, despite the horror of the past 3 days, she felt drawn to this quiet cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere to save her. "You should try to get some sleep," Wesley said, breaking the moment. "We have a long ride tomorrow and you need rest." "What about you?" Genevieve asked. "I will keep watch for a while. Make sure those men do not decide to double back and try to reclaim their cargo." The casual way he said it, as if she were nothing more than a shipment of goods to those men, sent a chill through Genevieve. Because that was exactly what she had been to them. Not a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams, but simply a commodity to be delivered. Wesley seemed to sense her distress. He stood and walked around the fire, shrugging out of his jacket. "Here," he said, draping it over her shoulders. "It gets cold in the desert at night. This will help." The jacket was warm from his body heat and smelled like him. Genevieve pulled it close around herself. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "Try to sleep," he said again, his voice gentle. Then he moved back to the other side of the fire and settled onto the ground, his rifle across his lap, his attention focused outward on the darkness surrounding them. Genevieve curled up on her side, using a smooth rock as a pillow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Every small sound made her start, certain that the kidnappers had returned. But gradually, listening to the crackle of the fire and the steady presence of Wesley keeping watch, she felt herself relax. Her eyes drifted closed and she finally slept. She woke several times during the night, disoriented and frightened, But each time she saw Wesley still sitting there, still watching, and managed to calm herself enough to slip back into an uneasy rest. When she finally opened her eyes to find the eastern sky beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn, she felt more human than she had in days. Wesley was pouring water from his canteen over the remains of the fire, making sure every ember was extinguished. He looked up when he heard her stirring. "Morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Genevieve admitted, sitting up slowly. "But better. Thank you for keeping watch." "It is what needed doing," Wesley replied. He offered her the canteen. "Drink what you need. There is a spring about half a mile from here where we can refill before we head out." They broke camp quickly, Wesley moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Within 20 minutes they were mounted and moving again, heading northeast toward Winslow. The morning air was cool and fresh, a stark contrast to the blistering heat that would arrive by midday. True to his word, Wesley led them to a small spring tucked between two large rocks. The water was clear and cold, and Genevieve knelt beside it gratefully, splashing her face and drinking her fill. Wesley refilled his canteen and let his horse drink, then surprised Genevieve by producing a chunk of soap from his saddlebag. "You might want to clean up a bit," he said, turning his back to give her privacy. "I will be over with the horse. Take your time." It was not a proper bath, not even close, but Genevieve was able to wash her face and hands to scrub away 3 days of dust and grime. She did her best to fix her hair, braiding it back away from her face. When she was done, she felt considerably more presentable, though her dress was still torn and filthy. They mounted up again and continued their journey. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature began to rise. Wesley kept the horse at an easy pace, stopping frequently in patches of shade to let them all rest and cool down. He made conversation easily, telling her about his ranch, about the cattle he raised, about life in Arizona territory. "I came out here 5 years ago," he said. "Bought some land from a Mexican family who was moving back south, built up my herd slowly. It is hard work, but it is honest work, and I cannot imagine living anywhere else now." "Do you run the ranch alone?" Genevieve asked. "Mostly. I have a couple of hands who help during calving season and roundup, but day to day it is just me. I like the solitude, the space. Out here you can think without the noise of civilization crowding in." "It sounds lonely," Genevieve said softly. Wesley was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes it is," he admitted. "But lonely is better than being around people who do not matter to you. I learned that lesson young." There was a story there, Genevieve sensed, but she did not push. Instead she said, "Well, you matter to me. You saved my life, Wesley Aldridge. That is not something I will ever forget." She felt him tense slightly, then relax. "Glad I could help, Genevieve Norton," he said, and there was warmth in his voice. They stopped at midday to rest through the worst of the heat, taking shelter in the shade of a massive red rock formation. Wesley shared the last of his food with her, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the heat shimmer across the desert floor. Genevieve found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, always alert. He was probably around 26 or 27, she guessed. Young, but with the bearing of someone who had lived hard and learned from it. "Can I ask you something?" Genevieve said eventually. "Sure." "Why did you really follow that wagon? You said something seemed off, but there must be lots of wagons moving through these parts. What made you follow that one specifically?" Wesley considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I do not fully know. Something in my gut told me to check it out. My father used to say that a man who ignores his instincts in this country does not last long. I have tried to live by that." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." Wesley's voice went quiet. "He died when I was 19. Ranch accident. Taught me everything I know, though." "I am sorry," Genevieve said, understanding the weight of that loss. "Life goes on," Wesley said simply. "You honor the dead by living well. That is what he would have wanted." They rode on through the afternoon, and as the sun began its descent toward the horizon once more, Genevieve spotted something that made her heart leap. Buildings in the distance. Winslow. "Almost there," Wesley confirmed. "Another hour, maybe less." As they drew closer to town, Genevieve felt a complicated mix of emotions washing over her. Relief at being home, certainly. Gratitude for her rescue, but also something else, something she was almost afraid to name. In the past day and a half, she had felt safer with Wesley Aldridge than she had felt anywhere since her parents died. The thought of saying goodbye to him left an unexpected ache in her chest. They rode into Winslow as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. People on the street stopped to stare at the sight of Genevieve in her torn, dirty dress, riding double behind a cowboy most of them did not recognize. Wesley guided his horse straight to the boarding house on 2nd Street. The door flew open before they even dismounted, and Aunt Margaret came running out, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Genevieve, oh my dear girl, we thought you were dead." Wesley helped Genevieve down and she stumbled into her aunt's embrace, finally letting herself cry. All the fear and pain and terror of the past 3 days came pouring out in great heaving sobs while Margaret held her and murmured soothing words. When Genevieve finally managed to compose herself, she turned to find Wesley standing a respectful distance away, hat in his hands. "Aunt Margaret," she said, wiping her eyes, "this is Wesley Aldridge. He saved me. He stopped the wagon and got me away from the men who took me." Margaret turned to Wesley, her lined face full of gratitude. "Then you have my eternal thanks, Mr. Aldridge. I do not know how to repay you for bringing her back to me." "No repayment necessary, madam," Wesley said. "I only did what anyone would have done." "That is not true, and you know it," Genevieve said softly. "Most people would have ridden past." Their eyes met and held. Wesley's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that made Genevieve's breath catch. "We need to report this to Sheriff Collins," Margaret said, breaking the moment. "He needs to know what happened, needs to start looking for those men." "Agreed," Wesley said. "I can describe them well enough, and the wagon." The next hour was a flurry of activity. Sheriff Collins was summoned and listened grimly to Genevieve's story, taking notes while Wesley provided descriptions of the kidnappers. The sheriff promised to send word to the U.S. Marshals and to keep extra men watching the roads around Winslow. "Do you have any idea why someone would want to kidnap you, Miss Norton?" the sheriff asked. Genevieve shook her head helplessly. "None at all. I do not have money, I do not have family connections. I cannot imagine what use I would be to anyone. Sometimes these gangs grab young women to sell to brothels in California or Mexico," the sheriff said bluntly. "Sorry to be crude, but that is likely what they had in mind." Genevieve felt sick. Wesley's jaw tightened. "All the more reason to find them and make an example," he said coldly. After the sheriff left, Margaret insisted that Wesley stay for dinner. "It is the least I can do," she said firmly, "and I will not take no for an answer." Wesley looked like he wanted to refuse, but Genevieve added her own plea. "Please stay," she said. "I would like to talk more, once I have had a chance to clean up properly." He relented with a small nod. While Margaret went to prepare food and Genevieve went upstairs to bathe and change, Wesley waited in the boarding house parlor, looking distinctly uncomfortable among the floral wallpaper and delicate furniture. When Genevieve came back down an hour later, scrubbed clean and wearing a simple blue dress, she found him standing by the window, staring out at the street. He turned at the sound of her footsteps and something flickered in his eyes as he took in her appearance. "You look better," he said. "I feel human again," Genevieve replied. She moved to stand beside him at the window. "Wesley, I want you to know that what you did means everything to me. You risked your life for a complete stranger." "I could not have lived with myself if I had ridden past," Wesley said simply. They stood in silence for a moment, and then Genevieve found herself saying, "Will you come visit? When you are in town, I mean. It would be nice to see you again." Wesley looked at her searchingly. "You sure about that? I am just a rancher, Miss Norton. I do not have much to offer in the way of refined company." "I do not want refined company," Genevieve said honestly. "I want honest company, and you seem like the most honest man I have ever met." A slow smile spread across Wesley's face, transforming it entirely. "In that case, I would be honored to call on you, Miss Norton." "Genevieve," she corrected. "Please, just Genevieve." "Wesley," he replied. "Just Wesley." Dinner was a simple but hearty affair, and Margaret proved to be an excellent cook. She peppered Wesley with questions about his ranch, his life, clearly sizing him up as a potential suitor for her niece. Wesley answered everything patiently, and Genevieve found herself learning more about him with each response. He had been born in Texas, moved to Arizona Territory as a teenager after his mother died. He had worked various jobs, saving money until he could buy his own land. He read extensively, taught himself mathematics and basic veterinary medicine from books. He believed in hard work, fair dealing, and the notion that a man's word was his bond. "You sound almost too good to be true," Margaret said with a hint of suspicion. Wesley laughed, a rich, warm sound. "Oh, I have plenty of faults, madam. I am stubborn as a mule when I think I am right. I have a temper, though I have learned to control it better over the years, and I am told I can be too solitary for my own good." "Those do not sound like terrible faults to me," Genevieve said. After dinner, Wesley stood to leave. "I have imposed on your hospitality long enough," he said. "And I need to get back to my ranch tomorrow. The cattle do not tend themselves." Genevieve walked him out onto the porch. The night air was cool and filled with the sounds of Winslow settling in for the evening. Wesley settled his hat on his head and turned to face her. "Thank you again," Genevieve said. "I know I keep saying it, but I do not know what else to say." "You do not need to say anything," Wesley replied. He hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said about calling on you, if that is still something you would want." "It is," Genevieve said quickly. "Very much." "Then I will be back in 2 weeks," Wesley said. "I have business in town anyway, selling some cattle. Maybe you would allow me to take you to dinner. I would like that." They stood looking at each other for a long moment, and Genevieve felt that pull again, that inexplicable connection to this man who had ridden into her life at exactly the right moment. Finally, Wesley tipped his hat to her and descended the porch steps, heading toward where his horse waited. "Wesley," Genevieve called after him. He turned back. "Yes, ride safe." His smile was visible even in the darkness. "Always do, Genevieve. Always do." She watched until he disappeared from sight, then went back inside where Margaret was waiting with raised eyebrows and a knowing smile. "That is quite a man," Margaret said. "Yes," Genevieve agreed softly. "He really is." The next 2 weeks passed slowly. Genevieve resumed her sewing work, fielded countless questions from curious townspeople about her ordeal, and tried not to think too much about the fact that someone had wanted to kidnap her badly enough to hire professionals. Sheriff Collins had no new leads, and the U.S. Marshals had sent word that they were investigating but had little to go on. "Try not to worry yourself sick," Margaret advised. "Those men are likely halfway to California by now, and whoever hired them has probably moved on to easier targets. You are safe here." Genevieve wanted to believe that, but she found herself jumping at shadows, avoiding going anywhere alone. The only time she truly felt at peace was when she was sewing, her hands busy with familiar work, her mind able to wander to more pleasant thoughts. Thoughts that, if she was being honest with herself, increasingly centered around a certain gray-eyed cowboy. Exactly 2 weeks after her rescue, Wesley Aldridge rode back into Winslow. Genevieve saw him from the window of the boarding house, and her heart did a strange little flip in her chest. He looked trail-worn and dusty, but as handsome as she remembered. She met him at the door before he could even knock. "Hello," she said, suddenly feeling shy. "Hello yourself," Wesley replied, his eyes warming at the sight of her. "I hope I am not too early." "I finished my business quicker than expected." "Not at all. Let me just get my shawl." They walked to the hotel restaurant, which was the finest dining establishment Winslow had to offer. It was not fancy by any stretch, but the food was good and the atmosphere was pleasant. Wesley held her chair for her, ordered them both the special, and then simply looked at her with those intense gray eyes. "I thought about you," he said abruptly. "These past 2 weeks, probably more than I should have." "I thought about you too," Genevieve admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. "I kept wondering if you were all right, if the ranch was doing well. Ranch is fine. Cattle are thriving, but I found myself distracted, which is not like me." Wesley leaned forward slightly. "Genevieve, I need to be straight with you about something." "All right," she said, her stomach tightening with nervousness. "I am not a man who does things halfway," Wesley said carefully. "When I commit to something, I commit fully, and I find myself wanting to commit to getting to know you better, properly. With the intention of seeing if this could be something real." He paused. "But I also know that you have been through something traumatic, and the last thing I want to do is push you into anything you are not ready for." Genevieve felt warmth spreading through her chest. "Wesley, you saved my life. You were kind and protective and honorable when you could have been anything else. I trust you more than I trust almost anyone. And yes, I want to see if this could be something real. Very much." Relief and happiness flickered across Wesley's face. "Then we will take it slow," he said. "Do this properly. I will court you the right way." Over dinner they talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily between them. Wesley told her about his ranch, about the challenges and rewards of raising cattle in Arizona territory. Genevieve told him about her life in Missouri before the fire, about her parents, about her dreams of maybe opening her own dress shop someday. "You are good with a needle?" Wesley asked. "Very good," Genevieve said without false modesty. "I can make just about anything if I have the right fabric and enough time." "My shirts could definitely use someone with skill working on them," Wesley said ruefully, showing her a tear in his sleeve that had been crudely mended. "I am decent with a lot of things, but sewing is not one of them." Genevieve laughed. "I could fix that for you, and make you some new ones if you like." "I would like that," Wesley said softly, and the way he was looking at her suggested he was not just talking about the shirts. They walked back to the boarding house slowly, neither of them in any hurry for the evening to end. On the porch, Wesley took her hand gently. "I will be back next week," he said, "and the week after that, for as long as you will have me visiting." "That might be a very long time," Genevieve warned him. "Good," Wesley said simply. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Genevieve." "Good night, Wesley." And so began a courtship that would become the talk of Winslow. Every week without fail, Wesley would ride into town to see Genevieve. Sometimes they would have dinner, sometimes they would simply walk through town talking, and sometimes she would visit his ranch, riding out with Margaret as a chaperone to see the land he was so proud of. The ranch was indeed impressive, a sprawling property with good grass and reliable water sources. Wesley had built the house himself, a solid structure of adobe and wood that was simple but well made. He showed her everything with obvious pride. The barn, the corrals, the small vegetable garden he maintained, the view from the hill where he planned to eventually expand. "It is not much yet," he said as they stood on that hill looking out over his land, "but I have plans. Someday I want a proper ranch house, maybe with a second floor, more cattle, maybe some horses too." "It is already wonderful," Genevieve said honestly. "You built all of this yourself in just 5 years. That is incredible, Wesley." He looked at her then with an expression so tender it made her breath catch. "I always thought I was building it just for me," he said quietly. "But standing here with you, I realize I was maybe building it for something else, for a future I had not yet imagined." They grew closer with each passing week. Wesley was patient and respectful, never pushing for more than Genevieve was comfortable giving. But there were moments, stolen glances and accidental touches, when the attraction between them was almost palpable. 3 months after her rescue, on a warm evening in August, Wesley asked Margaret for permission to formally court Genevieve with the intention of marriage. Margaret, who had come to deeply respect the young rancher, gave her blessing readily. "You are a good man, Wesley Aldridge," she told him. "And you make my niece happy. That is all I could ask for." That night, under a sky full of stars, Wesley asked Genevieve to be his wife. "I know it has not been that long," he said as they sat on the porch swing at the boarding house. "And I know some might say we are rushing. But Genevieve, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, your laugh. I love the way you see beauty in everything, even in this harsh desert. I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." Genevieve felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "Yes, Wesley, yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I do not have a ring yet," Wesley admitted sheepishly. "I should have planned this better." "I do not need a ring," Genevieve said. "I just need you." But Wesley insisted on doing things properly. The next week he returned to Winslow with a simple gold band set with a small but beautiful turquoise stone. "It is not much," he said as he slipped it onto her finger. "But the turquoise came from Arizona, just like our love story started here. Seemed fitting." "It is perfect," Genevieve said, admiring the way the stone caught the light. "Absolutely perfect." They were married in September of 1883 in a simple ceremony at the church in Winslow. Margaret cried happy tears, and half the town turned out to celebrate. Sheriff Collins was there, along with the boarding house residents and many of the people Genevieve had sewn for over the past year. Wesley's ranch hands stood up as his witnesses, rough men who nonetheless cleaned up well and clearly thought highly of their boss. After the ceremony, there was a dance in the town square. Wesley proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, guiding Genevieve through waltzes and reels with easy confidence. "Where did a rancher learn to dance like this?" she asked, breathless and laughing. "My mother insisted on teaching me," Wesley said. "Said even a cowboy needed to know how to treat a lady properly. I am glad now that I paid attention." They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Winslow before riding out to the ranch the next morning. As they approached the house, Wesley suddenly reined in his horse. "What is it?" Genevieve asked. Without a word, Wesley dismounted and then helped Genevieve down. Then, before she could process what he was doing, he swept her up into his arms. "Wesley," she laughed, "what are you doing?" "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he said, grinning. "It is tradition." He carried her all the way into the house and did not set her down until they were standing in the main room. Genevieve looked around at what was now her home, taking in the simple furniture, the stone fireplace, the windows that let in the warm Arizona sunlight. "We can fix it up however you like," Wesley said, suddenly sounding nervous. "Paint, new furniture, curtains, whatever you want. I want you to feel like this is your home too." Genevieve turned to him and cupped his face in her hands. "Wesley Aldridge, this is already perfect because you are here. Everything else is just details." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Genevieve felt herself melting into him. This man who had ridden out of nowhere to save her life had become her entire world. Life on the ranch was hard work, but Genevieve found herself thriving. She learned to help with the cattle, to cook on the wood stove, to manage the household accounts. She set up a sewing corner in the main room where she could work on mending Wesley's clothes and making new curtains and linens for their home. She planted flowers around the house, bright splashes of color against the desert landscape. Wesley was everything a husband should be: hardworking, attentive, affectionate. He never spoke harshly to her, never made her feel less than his equal partner in building their life together. At night they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, talking about their day, making plans for the future. "I want children," Wesley said one evening about 6 months into their marriage. "A whole house full of them if we are blessed." "What about you?" "I want that too," Genevieve said softly. "I want to give our children the kind of loving home I had before I lost my parents, the kind of security and happiness I have found with you." Her wish was granted sooner than either of them expected. By spring of 1884, Genevieve was pregnant. Wesley was beside himself with joy and nervousness, fussing over her constantly, trying to convince her to do less work around the ranch. "I am pregnant, not sick," Genevieve told him with exasperated affection. Women have been having babies since the dawn of time while still managing to get things done. But she let him fuss, understanding that it came from a place of love and care. And truth be told, as her pregnancy progressed and the Arizona summer heat bore down on them, she was grateful for his help with the heavier chores. Their son was born in December of 1884, right before Christmas. The birth was long and difficult, attended by the midwife from Winslow and Aunt Margaret. Wesley paced outside the bedroom for hours, wearing a path in the floorboards, until finally Margaret emerged with a tired smile. "You have a son," she told him, "and Genevieve is asking for you." Wesley rushed into the bedroom to find his wife exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a quilt Genevieve had made herself. His son had a cap of dark hair, and when Wesley bent to look at him, the baby opened eyes that were already showing hints of gray. "He looks like you," Genevieve said softly. "He is perfect," Wesley breathed. "You are both perfect." He pressed a kiss to Genevieve's forehead. Thank you for him, for everything." They named him William after Wesley's father. Little Will was a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world around him with those serious gray eyes. Wesley was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, singing to him, talking to him, carrying him around the ranch to show him everything. "He is too young to understand any of this," Genevieve said, laughing as she watched Wesley explain the finer points of cattle breeding to their 3-month-old son. "Never too young to learn," Wesley replied solemnly, though his eyes were twinkling. "Right, Will. You are going to be the best rancher in Arizona someday." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to prosper as Wesley's reputation for quality cattle spread throughout the territory. Genevieve took on sewing commissions from Winslow, working during Will's naps, slowly building up savings toward her dream of maybe opening a shop someday. Margaret visited frequently, doting on her great-nephew and helping Genevieve with the endless work that came with running a ranch household. 2 years after Will's birth, Genevieve found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter was born in the spring of 1887 with minimal difficulty. They named her Grace, and she had her mother's green eyes and a head of golden hair that neither parent could quite explain. "Must be from somewhere way back in the family," Wesley said, marveling at his daughter's fair coloring. "But she is beautiful, just like her mother." With 2 young children, the ranch house felt smaller than ever. True to his word from years earlier, Wesley began planning an expansion. Over the course of the next year, with the help of his ranch hands and some carpenters from Winslow, they added a second floor to the house with 3 additional bedrooms and even a small indoor bathroom, a luxury almost unheard of in rural Arizona at that time. "I want our children to have every advantage I can give them," Wesley explained as they stood looking at the nearly completed addition. "And who knows, maybe we will have more. Need to plan ahead." They did have more. A second son, Robert, arrived in 1889, followed by another daughter, Lily, in 1891. The house that had once seemed so big to Genevieve now rang with the sounds of children playing, arguing, laughing. It was chaos, and it was wonderful through it all. Wesley and Genevieve's love only deepened. Even on the hardest days, when the cattle were sick, or the children were cranky or money was tight, they faced everything together. Wesley still looked at his wife with the same intensity he had shown that day he lifted her out of the wagon, and Genevieve still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her. "You ever think about that day?" Genevieve asked one evening when the children were asleep and they were sitting on the porch watching the stars. "The day you saved me." "Every day," Wesley admitted. "I think about how easily I could have ridden past, how I almost did, telling myself it was none of my business. And then I think about everything I would have lost if I had made that choice." "I think about it too," Genevieve said softly. "About how terrified I was, how certain I was that something horrible was going to happen to me, and then you were there, like something out of a story." "My hero in a dusty hat," Wesley chuckled. "I do not know about hero, I just did what felt right." "That is exactly what makes you a hero," Genevieve said. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saved me in more ways than one, Wesley. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions of living, trying to move past losing my parents, trying to find some kind of purpose. You gave me all of that. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to wake up excited for each day." "You gave me the same," Wesley said, wrapping his arm around her. "This ranch, it was just a place before you. Now it is a home, our home." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Finally, Genevieve said, "Do you ever wonder who hired those men?" "Why they wanted me?" "Sometimes," Wesley admitted. "Sheriff Collins never did solve that case. The marshals looked into it but hit dead ends. Those 2 men vanished like smoke." "I used to have nightmares about them coming back," Genevieve said, "but I have not had one of those dreams in years now. I think I finally feel safe enough to let it go." "You are safe," Wesley said firmly. "I will always keep you safe, you and the children. That is a promise." And he kept that promise. Years passed, and the Aldridge Ranch became one of the most successful operations in that part of Arizona. Will grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who idolized his father and followed him everywhere. Grace was spirited and artistic, constantly drawing pictures and making up elaborate stories. Robert was the family diplomat, able to mediate disputes between his siblings with patience beyond his years. And little Lily was fearless, climbing everything in sight and giving her parents regular heart attacks with her adventurous nature. Genevieve did eventually open her dress shop, a small establishment in Winslow that she managed with the help of 2 assistants, traveling into town 3 days a week while Wesley or Margaret watched the children. The shop was successful beyond her dreams, with women coming from all over the territory to commission pieces from her. "You have a real talent," Wesley told her proudly after she came home with news that the mayor's wife wanted an entire wardrobe made for an upcoming visit to San Francisco. "I am so proud of you. We make a good team," Genevieve said, kissing him. "You with the ranch, me with the shop, both of us with the children. We have built something real here, Wesley." In 1895, Arizona Territory was still rough and wild in many ways, but Winslow had grown considerably. There was talk of statehood eventually, of the territory becoming a proper part of the United States. Wesley served on the town council for a time, helping to make decisions about schools and roads and water rights. Genevieve organized charity drives and taught sewing classes to young women who wanted to learn a trade. Their lives were full and rich, and exactly what they had both dreamed of during those long talks in the early days of their courtship. But more than any material success, what sustained them was their love for each other. "You know what I realized today?" Wesley said one evening as they were getting ready for bed. They had been married for 12 years, had 4 children, had built a life together from nothing. "I realized that I fall more in love with you every single day. I did not think that was possible, but here we are." Genevieve looked at her husband, at the gray threading through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the Arizona sun, at the hands that were calloused from hard work, but still so gentle when they touched her. "I know exactly what you mean," she said softly. "You are my best friend, Wesley, my partner, the love of my life." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I thank God for that wagon," he murmured into her hair, "for those criminals who made the mistake of taking you. For whatever twist of fate put me on that trail that day, all of it led me to you. It led us to each other," Genevieve corrected, "and to this beautiful life we have made." They stood there in their bedroom, in the house they had built together, with their children sleeping peacefully down the hall, and felt nothing but gratitude for the strange and wonderful journey that had brought them to this moment. The years continued to roll by. Will grew tall and strong, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Wesley started to slow down a bit. Grace discovered a talent for painting and managed to get several of her pieces displayed in galleries in Phoenix and Tucson. Robert surprised everyone by deciding to become a doctor, heading east to medical school with his parents' blessing and financial support. And Lily, true to her fearless nature, became one of the best horse trainers in the territory, able to gentle even the wildest Mustang with patience and skill. Wesley and Genevieve watched their children grow and thrive with immense pride. They became grandparents in 1905 when Will married a local girl and had a son of his own. Then Grace got married and had twins. Before they knew it, the ranch was again filled with the sounds of children, though this time it was a new generation running through the rooms and playing in the barn. "We are old," Wesley said one evening, though he was smiling as he said it. He was in his early 50s now, still strong but moving a bit slower than he used to. "We are blessed," Genevieve corrected. She was 44, her dark hair showing streaks of silver, her face lined but still beautiful. "Look at everything we have. Our children are happy and successful. We have grandchildren. The ranch is thriving. We have each other." "When you put it that way," Wesley said, pulling her close, "old does not sound so bad." They still rode out together sometimes, just the 2 of them, heading to that hill where Wesley had once talked about his dreams for the future. Those dreams had all come true, and then some. Sometimes they would pack a lunch and spend the whole afternoon up there, talking and reminiscing and simply enjoying each other's company. On one such afternoon in the summer of 1908, 25 years after Wesley had stopped that wagon in the desert, they sat together watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. "Tell me again," Genevieve said, settling back against her husband's chest. "Tell you what?" Wesley asked, though he knew what she meant. "They played this game sometimes. Tell me about the day you saved me, what you were thinking, what you saw." Wesley was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I was tired," he said finally. "I had been in Flagstaff for 3 days dealing with cattle buyers who tried to cheat me at every turn. I was hot and dusty and just wanted to get home. And then I saw that wagon taking the smuggler's route and something made me pause." "Your instincts," Genevieve said. "Maybe. Or maybe it was fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I followed them, and when I finally stopped that wagon and pulled back the canvas, I saw the most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my life. Even covered in dust and tied up, you were breathtaking." "I was a mess," Genevieve protested, though she was smiling. "You were perfect," Wesley insisted. "And in that moment, when our eyes met, I felt something shift inside me, like everything in my life had been leading to that exact point." "Does that sound crazy?" "No," Genevieve said softly, "because I felt it too. Even terrified and exhausted as I was when you looked at me, I felt safe for the first time in days. I knew somehow that you were going to change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Wesley said. "I was so alone before you, Genevieve. I had convinced myself I was fine with it, that I did not need anyone. But you showed me what I was missing. You showed me what it meant to share a life with someone, to build something together." Genevieve turned in his arms so she could look at his face. "I love you, Wesley Aldridge. I have loved you from almost the first moment, and I will love you until my very last breath." "And I love you," Wesley said, his gray eyes intense as ever. "More than words can say." They kissed then, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, and the desert stretched out around them in all its harsh, beautiful glory. It was the same land where their story had begun, where a terrified young woman and a lonely cowboy had found each other against all odds. As the years continued to pass, Wesley and Genevieve remained devoted to each other through everything life threw at them. There were challenges, certainly. Droughts that threatened the ranch, economic downturns that made money tight, illness and injury and all the normal struggles of life. But they faced everything together, their partnership as strong as it had been from the beginning. In 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood. Wesley and Genevieve traveled to Phoenix for the celebration, marveling at how much the territory had changed since they had first met nearly 30 years earlier. What had once been wild and largely lawless was now a proper state with cities and schools, and a future bright with promise. "We helped build this," Wesley said as they watched the statehood ceremonies. "Not just us, but our generation. We took this hard land and made it home. And our children will continue the work," Genevieve said, watching their grandchildren play nearby. "That is the gift we give them. Not just property or money, but the knowledge that hard work and love can create something lasting." They returned to the ranch satisfied and content. Wesley was in his late 50s now, and finally agreed to step back from the day-to-day operations. Letting will take over completely while he served as an advisor and consultant. Genevieve had sold her dress shop a few years earlier, deciding she would rather spend her time with family and on charitable work. "We have earned our rest," she told Wesley. "Let us enjoy it," and they did. They traveled a bit, visiting Robert in Boston, where he had established a successful medical practice. They took a train to California to see the ocean, something neither of them had done before. They spent long, lazy days with their grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days and watching them grow. But their favorite times were still the quiet evenings on the porch, just the two of them, watching the desert sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Those moments of simple companionship were what they treasured most. In 1918, the world was changed forever by the Great War raging in Europe. Even in remote Arizona, they felt the effects. Some of the young men from Winslow went off to fight, including two of their grandsons. Wesley and Genevieve prayed daily for their safe return and breathed easier when the war finally ended and their boys came home, changed but alive. Through it all, their love remained constant. Wesley still reached for Genevieve's hand when they walked. Genevieve still felt a flutter in her chest when Wesley smiled at her. The passion of their early days had mellowed into something deeper and more profound, a love built on decades of shared experience, of weathering storms together, of choosing each other every single day. "You have any regrets?" Genevieve asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. It was a question that had been on her mind lately as she reflected on their long life together. Wesley thought about it seriously before answering. "Only one," he said finally. "I wish I had followed that wagon sooner. Stopped them before they had a chance to hurt you or scare you. Those 3 days you spent as their prisoner, that is the one thing I wish I could change. But if you had stopped them sooner, maybe we would not have met," Genevieve pointed out. "Maybe you would have just turned them over to the law and ridden on with your life." "No," Wesley said with certainty. "I would have found you somehow. We were meant to be, you and I. The universe would have brought us together one way or another." "You really believe that?" Genevieve asked. "With every fiber of my being," Wesley replied. "Some things are just meant to be, Genevieve. And you and me, we are one of those things." She leaned over and kissed him, this man who had been her savior, her husband, her partner, her best friend for more than 35 years. "I believe that too," she whispered. "I really do." They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1923 with a huge party at the ranch. All of their children and grandchildren gathered, along with what seemed like half of Winslow. There was food and music and dancing, and Wesley and Genevieve were toasted again and again for their enduring love and partnership. "Speech," someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant. Wesley stood reluctantly, pulling Genevieve up with him. "I am not much for speeches," he said, his voice still strong despite his years. "But I will say this. 40 years ago, I married the best woman I have ever known. She has been my rock, my inspiration, my everything. Every good thing in my life can be traced back to her. So here is to 40 more years, if the good Lord is willing." The crowd cheered and clinked glasses. Genevieve stood on her toes to kiss her husband's cheek, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. Looking around at all the faces, at the family they had created and the life they had built, she felt nothing but overwhelming gratitude. The years grew shorter as they grew older, each season seeming to fly by faster than the last. But Wesley and Genevieve savored every moment. They were in their 70s now, slowing down considerably but still sharp of mind and filled with life. They still took their rides to the hill overlooking the ranch when the weather was nice. They still sat on the porch in the evenings. They still held hands and shared their thoughts and made each other laugh. The great passionate romance of their youth had transformed into something even more beautiful, a quiet, steady love that had weathered everything life could throw at it. In the spring of 1930, Wesley fell ill with pneumonia. Genevieve nursed him through it with the help of Robert, who had returned to Arizona specifically to care for his father. For 2 weeks, the outcome was uncertain, and Genevieve barely left Wesley's bedside. "You cannot leave me yet," she told him during one of his more lucid moments. "We have not finished our story." "Our story will never be finished," Wesley said, his voice weak but his eyes still intense. "Even when we are gone, it will live on in our children and grandchildren, in this ranch, in everything we built together." "But I am not ready to let you go," Genevieve said, tears streaming down her face. "I am not going anywhere," Wesley promised. "Not yet, not if I can help it." And he kept that promise. Slowly, day by day, he recovered. By summer he was back on his feet, though moving more carefully than before. The illness had aged him, but it had also given them both a renewed appreciation for the time they had left. "We are living on borrowed time now," Wesley said one evening as they watched the sunset. "Every day is a gift." "Then let us make the most of every one," Genevieve replied, and they did. They spent their remaining years surrounded by family, sharing stories with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the history of the ranch and the tale of how a cowboy had stopped a wagon in the desert and found the love of his life. Wesley passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1935, at the age of 78. He had been working in the barn that afternoon, insisting he was still strong enough to help with small tasks, and had seemed in good spirits at dinner. That night, he simply went to sleep beside his beloved wife and did not wake up. Genevieve grieved deeply, but also found comfort in the knowledge that they had been blessed with 52 years together. She lived for another 5 years, remaining sharp and active well into her 80s. She spent that time with her children and grandchildren, finding joy in watching new generations grow and thrive on the land she and Wesley had loved so much. On a warm spring evening in 1940, Genevieve asked to be taken up to the hill one last time. Her grandson Will, named for his grandfather and now running the ranch himself, helped her up onto a horse and rode with her to the spot where his grandparents had spent so many afternoons together. "Tell me again, grandmother," he said as they sat looking out over the land. "Tell me how grandfather saved you." And Genevieve, now 80 years old, told the story one last time. She spoke of being terrified and bound in a wagon, of hearing hoofbeats approaching, of seeing Wesley for the first time as he pulled back the canvas and looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. She spoke of how he had lifted her out of that wagon, and in doing so had lifted her into a life more wonderful than she could have ever imagined. "He was my hero," she said softly. "But more than that, he was my partner, my equal, the other half of my soul. And I will carry that love with me until we meet again." She passed away peacefully that night, in the same bed where Wesley had died, in the house they had built together. The family buried her beside him in the small cemetery on the ranch, under a tree they had planted together 40 years earlier. On their shared headstone, their grandson had inscribed a simple message: "Wesley and Genevieve Aldridge, together in life, together forever." Their love story began when he stopped the horses and lifted her out. And that story, the tale of a cowboy who followed his instincts and saved a young woman from a terrible fate, who found in her the love of his life, who built with her a family and a legacy that would endure for generations, that story lived on. It was told around dinner tables and campfires, passed down from parent to child, becoming part of the history of the land itself. The ranch continued to thrive under the care of their descendants. The house was maintained and expanded over the years, but never lost its essential character. Visitors to Winslow could still see the boarding house where Genevieve had lived, now a historical landmark. And out in the desert, the old smuggler's route where Wesley had stopped that wagon was still visible, a faint track through the red rocks and sagebrush. Their children all lived long, full lives, carrying forward the values their parents had instilled. Will ran the ranch until his own son was ready to take over, maintaining the standards of quality and integrity his father had established. Grace became a renowned artist whose paintings of Arizona landscapes hung in museums across the country. Robert's medical practice served thousands of patients over the decades, and he trained dozens of young doctors in his methods. And Lily's horse training techniques were adopted by ranchers throughout the Southwest. Each of them married and had children of their own, and those children had children, spreading the Aldridge family tree across Arizona and beyond. But no matter where they went or what they did, they all carried with them the story of how their family began. How a terrified young woman and a lonely cowboy found each other in the middle of the desert and built something beautiful. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the Arizona landscape in shades of gold and crimson, if you listen carefully, some say you can still hear the echo of hoofbeats on an old desert trail. The sound of a cowboy riding hard toward his destiny, toward the moment that would change his life forever. The moment he would stop a wagon heading nowhere and lift out the woman who would become his everything. It was a love story for the ages, born in danger and hardship but flowering into something strong and lasting. A testament to the power of courage, of following your instincts, of taking a chance on a stranger who might just turn out to be the love of your life. Wesley and Genevieve Aldridge lived those values every day of their long marriage, and in doing so, they created not just a family or a successful ranch, but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. And so their story ends where it began, in the wild beauty of the Arizona desert, under a sky full of stars, with love conquering all. It is a story that reminds us that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that heroes come in unexpected forms, and that true love, when found and nurtured, can create miracles that last for generations. The end.